Navy Matters.
Hello, welcome back to History Repeats. I'm your host, Liam Carballal. Joining me again, as always, is Rich Acritelli. Richard.
Liam, how you doing?
Rich, let's continue where we were talking about just a moment ago with the American classic Forrest Gump, the historical accuracy, so to speak, of that movie. I think the last thing we were talking about was Vietnam, and there was one other thing about the way they shoot it that I thought was interesting. There's a scene where Forrest just keeps talking about how they're marching and marching and marching. And I thought that was interesting because you think of Vietnam, you think of helicopters, more mechanized sort of thing. Was that accurate? Like, was Vietnam completely mechanized, or was it more traditional?
Well, no, it was more, there wasn't as much mechanized there because the tanks didn't really, it wasn't really conducive to that in most of the areas of the country. Other areas of the country, there was armor there. But he was on his feet a lot. The Vietnam vets logged more time in the jungle, on the ground, than the World War II veterans did.
Yeah, I think like 1,000 hours of combat.
And that was something that they thought was pretty unfair in terms of how they were treated, because they said we were in country for so long. We were out in the field for so long, whereas other wars, they were able to get rotated in and out. Not to take away from those other wars because they were brutal as well, but they were there in Vietnam for an extremely long time. They were on their feet. Forrest was a grunt. He was, somebody who probably listened to Lieutenant Dan when he first met him, right? Right before he's going to the bathroom, he says, you take care of your feet. Yeah. You get your fresh socks.
Foreshadowing.
Try to keep your feet as dry as possible, and so on. So he's a grunt. You see him in the field. He's trying to write in the field itself to Jenny, and they're going to walk into that ambush, and he goes by the words that Jenny says to him. You don't have to be our hero. There's trouble. You take off, this and that. And then the football and the running comes out, and then he takes off, and then he turns around and says, well, I was all alone. Yeah. Then he goes back, and he grabs guys, a lot of times with their gear on and stuff like that. They're heavy. He grabs them. He brings them back to the river. Then he's kind of heading further towards the fighting. Then he grabs another guy, and so on. And then, the two big people he ends up grabbing, the two big soldiers, is his best friend Bubba, who is just mortally just wounded, and Lieutenant Dan, whose legs are just about almost gone on him, and he's trying to call on some air support. He's trying to let the his CO know that we've run into some trouble, and you wonder how some of the Vietnam veterans were able to handle their experiences. And they saw things and they handled things that might have been worse than that scene in terms of Forrest Gump. And the thing was, it was over and over again. And they were young kids, 18, 19, 20, 21 years old. They were young kids, and they had their whole life ahead of them, So when you look at Forrest, he grabs Lieutenant Dan and he listens to everything he tells him except to leave him there. Later on, Lieutenant Dan's going to have that bad PTSD and say, I shouldn't have survived. I should have died in the field. And he's going to relive a lot of, very negative, bad things, in terms of service. Yep. And then with Bubba, outside of Forrest losing his mother and maybe Jenny during the course of the film, Bubba is one of those, foundations for him that didn't judge him and, liked him and spoke to him about the future and being, shipboat captains and going back to where were they from? They were from the Southeast. They were from the bayou. They were from the water. That's what they knew. And, they had plans in a short period of time. They struck up, a pretty special relationship. He's a Southern white, he's a Southern black at a time where, even though you do have some integration, segregation was still extremely strong, and it wasn't changing anytime soon.
Yeah.
It could change constitutionally, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be changing quickly in the small towns and backward places and stuff like that. So it's very powerful, and they strike on things that I think as you get older, you respect the film a little bit more and you understand it a little bit more. It's not just entertainment. There's something to it. It really is it's a wonderful film. It really is.
Yeah. That is the veterans are a big theme in the movie. Lieutenant Dan, he loses his legs. Bubba, he gets killed. They talk about POWs. Well, I don't think
like when you see Forrest sitting on the bench.
Yep.
Part of it is him eating chocolates, and part of it is he's speaking about Jenny and his mom. The one older man that was sitting there goes. He mentions that riverbed, right, and he mentions getting pulled out of there, right. And then Forrest goes, well, I don't want to talk about that anymore.
Yeah.
What is that there? Possibly a little PTSD, a little, that's the way he handles it. Yep. And probably part of when he runs later on is some of that. It's not just some of the other things that I'm sure we'll probably talk about. It's the war, and it's one of those things where he's cutting the grass at his former football field in the town, and he's probably thinking about those things that he did earlier, and he's not saying much to anybody about it.
So he comes home, he gets the Medal of Honor. He actually gets wrapped up in an anti-war rally. I actually didn't know this until years later. The guy who's like making the speech beforehand, and he's joking about how everything he says is a curse. It's supposed to be Abby Hoffman, right?
I guess it's radical, anti-war. You're a good man for doing this and that. And then Forrest goes, all right, and but what's the beauty of that speech, right? Jenny sees him in front of maybe 1 million people, that whole mall and the whole area and all the buildings and the pool filled. So he gets to see her again. And what does she say? She says, wow, that uniform's a trip. Look at that guy, right? And then, but you hear, what do you have is these are the time periods, right? Forrest is conservative. He's going to do just about everything you tell him to do, or he's going to try, right? But he's going to leave you alone. He expects probably the same in return. Right?
I was going to say, they don't. Right. There's the anti-war protester. At least that one guy is like abusive, and so I don't know if is the movie like anti-war?
No, it's just getting into the different stages of the war, and you got to remember Jenny's so far to the left. Right. You take off. You don't have to listen. You can burn your draft card. You don't have to listen to the government itself. That was what was going on, right? You had Leave It to Beaver in America, right? And you had all these shows and this and that. And then, they'll call 1968 one of the worst years in American history. Right? You have
race riots.
Tet going on, race riots. Martin Luther King gets assassinated. You got Robert F. Kennedy gets assassinated. Then you get the emergence of Nixon. There's no clear, path in Vietnam. We're so far in. There's no way in and there's no way out. We're stuck. And then Walter Cronkite, when he says that, that's when LBJ says, well, if I lost Walter Cronkite, then I lost America. Because he was such a respected figure. And then you see, Forrest goes back right to the White House, and he shows his wound and this and that. Well, LBJ was he flew in the planes and bombers during World War II. He always wore the medal on his lapel. He knew that those missions were going to count for something politically down the road, because probably 60 or 70% of those politicians, probably from 1945 to about 1965, had seen some sort of military service before that time. So, of which you're seeing that more now. You're seeing a lot of the second Gulf War, the war on terror. You're seeing a lot of veterans that are now getting involved politically. You know, so, but you do see with the war, you see the differences between Jenny and Forrest. But what's the similarity that they have, though? Right? They're from the same home, and they look at things very similar in terms of being from Alabama and knowing each other and enjoying each other. And what does Forrest say? I wish the night didn't end.
Yep.
And then they go to the Black Panther Party meeting, and very radical, and that's what Martin Luther King was warning the government about. You want to negotiate with me. You don't want to negotiate what's coming down the road.
Yeah.
Because they're going to use force. And you're not going to necessarily listen to the government. And you saw that, right? And, what was the guy's name? Wes, right? Real radical, right?
Yeah.
He's got like the German memorabilia on him and stuff like that. And, he ends up hitting Jenny.
Calls him baby killer.
Yeah, baby killer. Who's the baby killer here, right? Yeah. And, Forrest Gump does not care about any of that. Okay? What Forrest Gump cares about is Jenny. And he looks across the room and he strikes her very hard. And all he has on his mind is getting after him.
Yeah.
So here you have a peaceful man, right? Who ends up literally just kicking the crap out of that guy, right? And he says he should not be putting his hands on you. So Forrest is a simple guy, but he knows, right? He does know right from wrong, and he follows that, right?
Yeah.
And then she goes, all right, Forrest, let's get out of here. And what do they do with the gun? They do this to their chest. And he goes, well, I'm sorry, I broke up your Black Panther Party meeting and this and that. And then he goes, and then the beautiful scene is, right, he gives the dirty look to him. He goes, that liar Johnson and this and that, right? And Forrest says to her, you should go home. Just go home, because he knows it's not right, the situation she's in. And then he gives Wes the dirty look, right? He does a squinty eye, right? And then in the back of the bus, they flash the peace sign.
Yeah.
So here he is with his Medal of Honor on and his uniform on, and you have Jenny with all the hippie stuff on, right? And it didn't matter. Didn't matter one bit. Right? So just a great film.
Then goes on to invent jogging.
Yeah, well, he I think in terms of the jogging, that probably stress, right? And that was the first time that Jenny comes home, right? And he's glad to see her, and he ends up asking her to marry him. And whatever the disability that he has, he kind of says, I know what love is. And then she says, well, I'm messed up. She gets involved in serious drug culture. You see the needles, you see the cocaine, right? As far as playing, ping pong and supporting the troops and going to China, right? And, all those different things. And seeing, President Nixon, Jenny's, caught up in some bad things that are going to hurt her severely about 10 or 12 years later, So, and then the running is stress. I was a big runner at one time, and you had a problem, you went out and you ran, and it kind of cleared your head. Or if I like to write, you went running and you thought of things that weren't quite there. For Forrest, the guy's a good athlete. He's disciplined. He has a strong mind, and it was a movement that people. They believed in it, They kind of looked at him and said, we could follow him. But what does he say? Oh, all right. It's a simple approach, right? Remember with the shirt? What does the shirt? What does the shirt say? Right?
It's a smiley face.
Yeah, shit happens, and
you just stepped in shit.
Yeah, and he goes, it happens, and that is, the beauty of Forrest Gump. He's going to break it down in simple terms. You know, and we talk about great leaders and military leaders and coaches and all these different figures. Why are they so great sometimes? Because they could break it down in simple terms where you could understand it.
Yeah.
Here's a guy who's now done a little bit of everything, right? And like we didn't mention like him being a shrimp boat captain, and then Lieutenant Dan coming back in his life, and when does Lieutenant Dan probably get a little peace, right? Is like he's in that storm and he goes, it's you against me, and Forrest is, but what happens, right? They become the leading shipboat.
Yeah, all the other ones get sunk in the storm.
Yeah, the shrimping, and they have so many different Jennies and they name it after her. And then he says, he never really kind of said thank you, but he jumps in the water and he's kind of starting to make peace and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And, he's getting away from the women in the city and the drinking and, and so on. He was a disciplined guy at one time. And, that was his path when he came home, which was not easy for these guys, right? They did not come home to many parades and yellow ribbons. And, it was not a good situation. Look where we are here in Glen Cove. This is a big town. It's an old town, right? How many Vietnam vets came home here where, they came home in their regular uniform and didn't say much. And, they didn't ask necessarily to go there. They were just trying to do their duty. Yeah. So.
Yeah. It was interesting. Like we mentioned, shit happens and the smiley face symbol. There's also like, especially towards the end, he becomes like a business mogul, like with Bubba Gump Shrimp.
Yeah. And then he goes to his...
Is that like a...
He goes to his mailbox.
Is it like a yuppie thing, I'm assuming?
No. Because you're looking at from 1945 to 1990.
Yeah.
You have one of the strongest middle classes ever in this nation. And a large part of that was the businesses taking root and establishing themselves, and the baby boom and, the suburbs and, all those different things that are going to expand America. And what expands America is the businesses and the needs of the people and so on. But it's funny because when he goes to the mailbox and he looks at it, he goes, oh, it's Lieutenant Dan invested our money, and it's Apple, right? Yeah. Apple right now is up to like $230 a share. Can you imagine buying that back then, right? And, it's actually more than that. I think it's $260 a share. So, but then what does Forrest say? It's one less thing that we have to worry about. And then what does he do?
He gives company.
Yeah, it's a fruit company, right? And then what does he do? He gives some of his money
to Bubba's
mother, right? Yeah. From his wealth, from the shrimping, and then his investments, and so on. And that's just like the simplicity of it. I'm going to do this. But then what do they show? The mother, who always waited on everyone else, has now got a nice condo or townhouse somewhere, and somebody's waiting on her, So you kind of see the tails turn a little bit, So,
all right. So we mentioned Apple. I think one of the last things they show in the movie, like the big event, would be the AIDS crisis. They don't. What's interesting, I don't think they ever specifically say AIDS, but they do say it's like a disease that Jenny.
Yeah, she has something that the doctors can't really put their finger on. They just know she's sick. I'm giving a talk tomorrow on Veterans Day.
Yeah.
And the different battles and stuff like that. And I was looking at the first Gulf War when President Bush went to visit the soldiers for Thanksgiving in the first Gulf War. And there was a couple 100,000 Americans there. And then I was looking at the statistics of the casualties. And more armed forces members died as a result of accidents, right?
Yeah, friendly fire.
Friendly fire than what the Iraqis had actually done, but they were on the front lines. And then it was an interesting quote that all these Americans went into harm's way, but the AIDS virus or sickness, whatever you want to call it, took more lives that year than what the Gulf War.
Oh, that's interesting.
And it wasn't even close. So what you're looking at is in the 1980s, it's kind of the start of it. Reagan was a strong president. He rebuilds the military. the economy. He kind of tells other countries, you're on notice. You can do whatever you want to us, but our reactions are going to be stronger than yours. And that gave other countries things to kind of think about, right? But where he was slow was AIDS and crack.
Yeah.
And here you have this older president. He's got to win in 1980. If he doesn't win, then he can no longer really run because his years are going to be counted against him. And he couldn't say the word AIDS.
Yeah.
Right? And then how does a drug do well in American society? It gets very cheap. And it gets very easy to get. So, you know, Forrest is like coming into grips that he is a father. And what does he say? The other kids make fun of him. No, he's very smart, you know. Yeah. He's playing ping pong and Forrest Jr. beats him and this and that. And so the transition is a little bit easier, right? Yeah. But the thing with Jenny is just like, you know, every one of Forrest's friends and family members almost dies on him.
Yeah.
And he like asks his mother, like, what is my destiny? You know, and she kind of says, you know, that's kind of up for you to find out or figure out or to fall upon you, you know, that sort of thing. And the AIDS was, you know, it was something because as bad as that was, and they get married, Lieutenant Dan comes back and he's married and he's got titanium legs and he says, it's the same stuff that they made the space shuttle with. Yeah, and, you know, they're hugging each other. And so in the midst of this really bad situation where Jenny knows a lot more about it than Forrest, right?
Yeah.
That, you know, he sees Lieutenant Dan and then Jenny meets him and, you know, and there's that bond with the military that is like unbreakable, right? And then, you know, he's taking care of Jenny through thick and through thin. You come back here, live here, I'll take care of everything. And then she finally does it, right? She's not running off. And, you know, she had a bad life. You know, she was abused. She was around drugs. There was nobody there to talk to her, you know. She was very lucky that Forrest, and I'm sure his mom, which you don't see, probably, you know, helped her out, which they did, right? His mother made some calls to get her out of that situation. She moved in with her grandmother. But it's you know, she kind of lived a little bit of a destructive life. You know, she had all this talent. She was a bright girl, beautiful, you know, all these different things. But she couldn't get away from all those negatives that were just on top of her. And then Forrest was probably one of the true positives. That
he demolishes the house she was abused.
Yeah, you know, he says, like, hey, listen, you know, we're going to get rid of this memory here, you know, and what does he do? Let's get rid of it. That's it. Yeah. In a moment's notice, you know, and you see, she goes through her own PTSD, right? Because she's throwing rocks and mud and stuff like that, and she's calling her father a bastard, and how could you do this to us, and so on. You know, it's something that she lived with for, you know, the rest of her life. And Forrest was somebody who wasn't supposed to be smart, and he wasn't supposed to be able to do all these different things and this and that. Turns out he's probably one of the smartest characters in that whole film. Yeah. Right? So
I remember, like, years ago, my dad had described the movie as like King Midas, a retelling of King Midas, because everything Forrest touches, like, it turns great. He makes successful businesses. He wins the Medal of Honor. He meets 3 different presidents. He becomes like a football star, but he just can't help Jenny. Every time he goes near her, something bad happens.
Well, I think that's more on Jenny.
Yeah.
You know, that's more on, she's trying to deal with her own situation. And you got to remember, there's no parents there. She gets kicked out of college for the Playboy with the
Playboy shoot with the college,
taking the pictures. That was serious years ago. You just didn't necessarily do those things, and then you're going to see that even changes, right, in terms of morals and stuff like that. Then the drugs, and you know, she's involved in some very, very serious things. And then when Forrest warns her, "Hey, listen, go home," you know, she doesn't do it. Yeah. She still goes down that path. And it's one of those things where I guess it was just going to lead down that road for her. You know, it's very unfortunate, right? Instead of, you know, living happily ever after and having their child and being financially taken care of and living in a beautiful area and going back home. She ends up dying, and she's buried under that tree that they sat on those branches. If you know, that's the closure of it.
So historically accurate? Or?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, definitely. I would. Yeah.
All right.
You know, and there's some humor in there as well.
Yeah.
Is it 100%? Maybe not, but it's definitely up there, right? So.
All right, Rich. It's always good to have you. This has been History Repeats. I'm your host, Liam Carballal. This is Richard Acritelli. Thank you for joining us, and stay tuned till next time. This is hmTv.